Welcome, everybody, to our webinar. So glad you could join us. Julia here from Inspira Advantage. We're an admissions consulting company dedicated to helping deserving students get into the school of their dreams. We've got an awesome webinar lined up for you, all about brainstorming and building your brand for your personal statement. I have two really awesome panelists here to kind of discuss that, and we'll introduce them in just a second. But before we do that, I just want to kind of go over the agenda and then a little bit of housekeeping things as we go through this webinar. But first, we'll be discussing understanding personal branding, the brainstorming process of how you can come up with that personal brand, brainstorming exercises and prompts, tips for selecting your most meaningful experiences and character traits and that will differentiate you in your personal statement, and strategies to ensure your narrative is cohesive. And then at the end, we'll have a designated Q&A portion. So if you have a question throughout the webinar, we'd ask that you hang on to that and type it into the chat box when we reach that Q&A section, and our panelists will be able to answer those questions for you. Another thing I want to flag is that this webinar will be recorded, and it'll be sent out to everybody who registered tomorrow morning. So if you want to rewind or if you missed something, you're free to watch the webinar and review. Okay, moving on to our panelists. We have Austin and Nate here. Austin, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Nate, you after, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, that sounds good. Hi, everyone. I'm Austin. I am a graduating medical student, believe it or not. I think I started high school about 10 years ago. I took a research year in med school, but am graduating from Stanford, and I'll be staying there for dermatology, but taking a pit stop in Salt Lake City for a transitional year, all jargon of which you all don't need to know about right now. It makes more sense when you're in it. But I have a wife who's a physician assistant, so I kind of understand that process as well. And I have 2 cats. So that's where I'm not zooming in from. I guess we're using Webinar Jam. So.
Hi, I'm Nate. I'm very jealous of Austin right now. I am not graduating. I am a 4th year, soon to be 5th year in an MD PhD program, the USC Caltech program. So also from California. So it's still nice and light outside. And I'm really excited about this topic today. Personal statements are like one of the things that I really geek out on when it comes to consulting or just advising pre-meds on what to do, because I think it is your opportunity that you really have the most control of to really tell your story and make the biggest impact on your application.
Amazing. Thanks, everyone. Okay, let's touch on understanding personal branding.
Nate, do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to go for this?
I'm happy to kick it off. So understanding personal branding. Your med school application personal brand is how you cohesively present yourself to the admissions committee. It's about showing them who you are beyond your grades and test scores, thereby giving them a glimpse into what makes you unique. Your personal brand includes interrelated values, experiences, and qualities that make you a great fit for medical school. Think of it as telling a story about yourself, but in a way that highlights your strengths and what you bring to the table. There are a couple of things that I really like from this slide that is really great. So I think using the word showing is like one of those big things we really talk about in admissions. So showing instead of telling, how do you silently sort of communicate to the admissions committee that you demonstrate and you have these skills and capabilities, traits, qualities that make you a really excellent future physician, an excellent future doctor, like compassion, curiosity towards science, without telling them I'm this empathetic person who's really interested in science and has all these things. So it's really that idea of which stories you select and you pick out to show the admissions committee that you have these traits and these characteristics. And you're sort of doing this game of where you're communicating it to them through story. And the admissions committee then goes, oh, I can read into their application. And I can see from this story that they chose to tell me that they're demonstrating this trait or characteristic. The other thing I think we're sort of jumping into is your application is one big cohesive brand. It is sort of, you like to decide hopefully early on before the application, but like figuring out your interests and being authentic and genuine to who you are will let you really figure out what your brand is and maybe what the angle is for your medical school application.
Yeah. I agree with what Nate said completely. Like cohesive and showing are the biggest things, both in terms of the personal statement and like the rest of your application, including secondaries, everything that you have to do. I would say looking back, I don't think this idea of like personal branding really was percolated when I was applying to med school. I think I just tried to make it as easily readable, but also as powerful as possible. And I think nowadays we kind of hear about it in social media, like everyone has this personal brand of like how they present themselves. And in a way, you're kind of adapting that to a professional setting. So, this goes back to like your advisors at your colleges or close family members saying like, it's not about ticking boxes to get into med school, especially with the personal statement. And this idea again comes back to the personal brand, that being personal. You see what's out there, again, like on TikTok and Instagram Reels, everyone has like this unique take on maybe even the same topic, yet, in doing that, they stand out because they're inserting themselves into that. And so you may have similar experiences to these other applicants, but if you show the admissions committee that you have like different reflections on it or did it a different way or solved different problems within it, that's how you stand out while remaining cohesive.
Okay, I think we kind of touched on it, but let's dive into the brainstorming process.
I guess I'll pop over to this one first. So, this is a step that is often skipped by people. So this is all about like, what is the first step to making this great personal statement? It can be a lot to stare at a blank Word or Google document. And to me, I distinctly remember that cursor blinking. And then I realized I was kind of skipping this step in brainstorming. You're not going to have this cohesive idea just kind of pop out of nowhere, especially if you're just beginning. It's all about kind of using techniques to bring that out of your subconscious and into the conscious and start connecting things. So again, this cohesiveness, overarching story is really, really important, especially with the personal statement. You can have amazing, amazing paragraphs on like anecdotes with patients or research experiences, but if it doesn't tell all in all why you want to be a doctor and it doesn't make sense together, then it's not going to be a good personal statement despite those achievements. And oftentimes you have to really dig deep to figure out what makes you stand out. I think one of the interrelated values that all of us have going into medicine is a kind of a sense of humility. And this is one of those times where you have to push that a little bit to the side and really be able to show yourself to the admissions committee. And like Nate mentioned previously, you have to kind of catch their eye in that respect. So brainstorming in this sense is about organizing things and putting it all out there so that you can start seeing the threads that you're ultimately going to put together in your personal statement and in the rest of your application.
Yeah, I think that was all really awesome. The only thing I would add to that is like, even before, I would argue a little bit, we start to think of brainstorming when we finally get to like writing those essays, but you can also, as you go throughout your experiences as a pre-med, journal about the things that are really important to you and maybe some things that stand out because they're going to be a whole lot fresher in your mind, that patient interaction right after it happens, rather than waiting until it comes time to write that application. You're like, I remember bits and pieces of it. But those experiences that are really important to you, really meaningful to you and stand out, those are those genuine moments that you can draw from later on. So you don't have to wait until it's mid-March of the year you're applying. You can start to do that a little bit more in advance and then come back to them. And I'll take this slide. So brainstorming techniques can help you formalize how you organize your thoughts and come up with ideas. Mind mapping is one technique in which you jot down all your ideas on paper and connect them like a big web. Another technique is free writing, in which you write down whatever comes to mind without worrying about grammar or structure. I encourage all of my students to do this. I say, just write it out. I can always cut it down. But if you don't tell me the story, I can't be like, oh, that's the one story that's like really caught my eye and will catch a lot of people's eyes. So even if you aren't working with like an admissions counselor, you can do that with family and friends where you can just free write things out and then you can have them look at everything from like the whole like bird's eye view, just start like looking at how all these things like maybe start to fit together, and maybe they will provide feedback for you earlier on, even when it's in those rough stages, can be really helpful to get feedback at an earlier point rather than writing everything out and then realizing that maybe down the road you just have 3 separate activities that don't really have solid connection with one another. Listing all your experiences, skills, and qualities that could be relevant to medical school. I think this is a good idea of where to start, but don't by any means turn that into a personal statement. You can list those things out, but you want to use that list that you just made, those skills, those experiences, and say, what are the stories and anecdotes that can show these skills and qualities through my experiences? Not saying, I am someone who is this, I am someone who is that. Coming back to like what Austin said, a little bit of humility. We don't want you to come too gung-ho in the application being like, I know I'm a great medical school applicant because XYZ. Admissions committees have a couple narcissists on them who we like to think that we can see past everything, all the flowery language, and say, oh, that's why they're going to be a really great medical school applicant or a really great future physician.
Yeah. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to reemphasize one of the most important things that Nate kind of inserted in between these 2 slides, this idea of journaling your experiences. It takes going through undergrad, going through medical school to understand like you experience these poignant interactions so like vividly at the time, but 4 years down the line, you're not going to remember the details. So it really does matter if you make time after like having a great volunteer night or accomplishing something really big to capture that. And literally just using even these brainstorming techniques where you can just free write it. You don't have to present it to anyone. But if you have that to draw upon when you're finally doing applications, it makes all the difference because then you're shifting your cognitive load from trying to remember those experiences to actually contextualizing and presenting those experiences in a certain way. I literally use this like, I guess it's almost a year ago, but I remember it with residency too. Like we have so many clinical experiences. I use the same techniques for residency applications. So if anything, you might as well be practicing for that level as well. And I think you can really fuse these 3 techniques that you see on the slides together and use them as different forms to ultimately come up with a nice map that allows you to see where you're going to start writing before you even start doing it. Yeah, so I actually love that this slide is the next one. It's like, okay, we have the techniques, but how do you implement those techniques? I think this idea of like protocolizing things and creating environments is also becoming more popular. I mean, the Huberman Lab is one of those things where it's kind of come to the fame of doing this, you know, seeing light in the morning to reset your circadian rhythm and such. And to effectively brainstorm, you really do need to be in that right setting where you're kind of pushing all the cognitive load to the side and really focusing on what's in front of you. And that takes a lot nowadays. There's a lot of distractions in our lives. Like I currently have 2 screens in front of me here for other work, and it's hard to, you know, focus on one thing without putting in techniques to do so. And so I think this is what this slide is talking about. It's all about the environment to bring out the best in you there. So obviously it's important for things to be quiet. Now, there are studies that are out there that show like whether you need lyrical music, non-lyrical music, whatever to focus and remember things and study well. I think everyone's different on that. I personally went from like lyrical to less lyrical music as I got older. And I feel like silence is better for me now. So it's more noise canceling than anything. But, you know, if you like calming music, if you like classical coffee music, just do that and really set yourself up for success. There's even something out there called binaural beats. They're supposed to be really good for getting you in that focus state, but I think that'll allow you to pull some ideas out really effectively. And then another thing to make it easy is having everything in reach. You do not want to shut off your attention to go get something and then have to kind of get back on topic. Just like trying to answer a text or an email, really, really important that you put on like a do not disturb when you're in these brainstorming sessions. I know you're not trying to make the next cure for cancer, and you may think this is overboard, but it really does help you when you can finally take, 20 minutes of warming up to get in that focus state, and having all those materials close is important. And then I was starting to mention minutes and time. This is going to take a lot of time. It's not going to come up spontaneously. You may have spurts of ideas, but you really have to give it some time. And that's where Nate was talking about, like, do not just start waiting until a couple months before. You should even start thinking of this like the year you apply, beginning of that year. That way your subconscious is working on it at night. You're beginning to think about things and you talk with other people. It's all about getting it out of your head and showing other people. And I think that takes a lot of time, especially for me. I literally started thinking about things in January when I applied to med school, that like end of May, June timeline. And I think that was really important for my success too.
Okay, so we talked about brainstorming, how important it is. Let's discuss brainstorming exercises and prompts.
Yeah, so for the first exercise, identifying your values and passions, I think this is one that I really enjoy because I think it gets at the idea of like this sort of having this like really authentic angle when you're coming at medical school admissions. And I talk about this a lot whenever I'm in one of these webinars. But whenever you're going throughout your pre-med journey, it's really important to be authentic to yourself and your experiences. Identify the experiences that are really fulfilling to you, because there are only so many hours in the day. So let your values and passions guide you even before the personal statement. So reflecting on what matters most to you. Think about what matters to you. It could be helping others, making a difference, or pursuing knowledge. I also really like to cue into people thinking about what types of patient populations they're really passionate about working with, because this usually comes in to a lot of people's personal statements or secondary essays or in the interview process. Some people have prior experiences working either in a certain type of clinical setting with certain types of patient populations, or just with like certain age groups. And those can also really help you identify and like solidify if you're like, oh, I have all this experience working in like hospice settings, and I have all these examples of how I worked in doing hospice research and Parkinson's research, and then working with the National Hospice Foundation. I'm like, okay, it's clear what matters to you is like the type of patient population that you want to help the most are elderly people, and like sort of working in the end of life care sphere. That gives me a really good idea of your values, what you're interested in, the types of people you like to work with, and the type of medicine that interests you. And that provides a really solid angle and foundation for how to craft your personal statement. Reflect on why these things are important to you. Poignant experiences in the past that shape such values and passions. It can be personal experiences with loved ones, families, or even yourself, or even experiences that you've had with patients or academically. Describe moments when you felt the most fulfilled. Recall moments in your life when you felt truly fulfilled. Moments when you're helping someone, achieving a goal, or pursuing a hobby. Describe these moments in detail. What were you doing? How did it make you feel? What values or passions were you expressing? A really good formula for when you're launching into this anecdote structure. We don't have a lot of time, or not a lot of space in personal statements or time, truly, to accomplish what you are trying to do. There's not nearly enough space. So you really quickly, it's usually about a sentence long. With that, you're about to like set the scene, give me an idea of like what kind of activity you're participating in, where we are, what relative time we're at. And then I want you to like sort of next sentence, launch straight into the anecdote, give me the meat of that anecdote. Third/fourth sentence, give me some idea of like this reflection, values, how it changed you, how it impacted you. Fifth sentence, make this like sort of grand conclusion, if you can, that ties it all in together with a bow on top, and how that's going to make you a really great doctor. Easier said than done, but with practice, it gets a lot easier over time.
I think one way to start implementing this practice is like using Nate's idea of journaling, and use these reflections and prompts to contextualize that experience even further. Like, how did that matter to you, what you're writing down right now? And like, was this a moment when you felt the most fulfilled? I think it may be scary to approach these questions in the beginning. I know, coming from a background where Like I had no immediate or extended families in healthcare at all, no nurses, doctors, pharmacists, or anything. I was still trying to figure out like why I'm gravitating towards medicine, even when I was doing so. And ultimately it led me to why I'm like in front of you today. And that's because of like mentoring and teaching future colleagues and next generations of healthcare providers, especially those who maybe don't have that background where their parents or siblings or other relatives can give them guidance. And that kind of was borne out in my personal statement of talking about how I walk into a room confidently saying, I don't know when I don't know. And so you can see, like, you can take anything from Nate's example of like having this cohesive sort of approach to a specific type of care to being on the exact opposite and just identifying problems, and you can really make that yours. So don't feel like you have to fit in a box at all.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, we like interesting personal statements more than anything. I like to read something that I'm like, no one else could have written that. And a good litmus test is if you write something, and I do this with a lot of pre-meds that I work with, I say, could anybody else have written this? Is this sort of the activities you're talking about? Are they, and even if you don't have the most unique activities in the world, that's okay. Your takeaways, your reflections on those activities can be really unique and really inform us about how you think in your perspective in medicine.
Yeah, I think that was a perfect way to say it. I think that really segues well into this next slide where we're looking, like we go deeper from like key experiences and values into like tangible things, skills, strengths. Are you really good at like learning things? Are you really good at interpersonal communication or being resilient in the setting of all these setbacks? And that's where you should also think about like what experiences show that the best. And you can start with that list of key skills and strengths, but you really have to formulate that into anecdotes and experiences such that it comes out in an interesting way. Like adcoms read hundreds, thousands of these personal statements over their lifetimes and whatnot. And it really starts to blur together if you are drawing upon the same key skills and strengths that everyone who's trying to get into medicine is. So it's important to go to that next step of like, what did you take away from those experiences? To be frank, like I took a very drastic approach to both of my personal statements, and it both worked out. Like I mentioned the one with medical school, but with residency, I actually tried to, I matched into dermatology, and I tried to match that on to my passion for weightlifting and fitness, and how those are kind of like both journeys in the sense that you're being seen while you're doing that and you can't necessarily hide. And I think that went really well because that was something I was passionate about. I wasn't necessarily scared about it being unique. So don't limit yourself in that way. And think about those times that you felt the most proud, when someone really makes you smile after you've done something wrong, like the things that you're the most proud of. And remember to capture that. Like, what did they say specifically? Those people that give you the praise could also be your letter writers in the future if you develop these longitudinal relationships. So I think these are all very, very important prompts that need to be formulated as you go about creating your personal statement.
Awesome. So jumping into exercise 3, uncovering your unique story, journaling activity. So we touched upon this earlier in the point, exploring key life experiences. So I think we talked about how journaling can be a really useful tool throughout the entire pre-medical experience process. Figure out a place where you're going to be able to lose the documents if you're a little unorganized like me. So find somewhere that you will be able to come back to them, hopefully on a computer, or if you handwrite it, just make sure you know where you keep it. And then go through the experiences in detail, what happened, what was its impact. This is the big part of where the majority of the gains are made. And the personal statement is the impact. It's the reflective piece. I always like to ask anyone I'm working with, how did you grow from this experience? Why was it important to you? And if you can answer me those questions, then I can start to get a really good idea of why I, as an admissions committee member, or I, as an interviewer, should really care about the story you're telling me. And again, what did you learn from it? So another great prompt is, what challenges have you overcome? Thinking about challenges or obstacles you faced in your life. These could be academic challenges, personal struggles, or difficult situations you've overcome. Write about these challenges and how you dealt with them. What strengths did you rely on, and how did these experiences shape you as a person? There's a lot of really effective personal statements that fall into this category. I would say don't overdo it. Like, don't invent a sob story just to like add a sob story to your application. I remember this one experience in particular where somebody was telling me about the a very large impact of their cat dying, and I'm like, yes, that can be like a really emotional experience, but like we've got to keep it within like the realms of, sorry to all the cat lovers out there, but like we've got to keep it like in a reasonable, tight manner to be like, that can be an important part of your life experience, but maybe the experience of your cat dying does not exactly tell me why you wanted to go into medicine. Maybe it would be better fit for like a veterinary medicine essay, but just like keep it relevant. You don't have to have these challenges you've overcome to have a good personal statement. It's not about checking off all the boxes. It's about telling your story and what applies to you. And if you have overcome challenges, this is a great opportunity to talk about it. It's in your personal statement or in your secondary essays.
Okay, let's touch on tips for selecting your most meaningful experiences and character traits.
So this kind of born out from what we touched on. These are more like those quick tips and tricks that'll help you make these connections. And again, it comes back to like those most poignant experiences, those things that are the biggest impacts. And of course, you want it within that professional realm. I think Nate brought up a good point where you could have these big events that happen in your life, but if they don't map onto why medicine, they're more likely going to be used in a different setting. Like, you don't want to center your personal statement on that. Of course, this is one of those things where you have to balance the humility with wanting to show all that you've accomplished. Because I feel like most of the people I work with, including like myself in the beginning, reflecting on this, like I didn't want to be in that bragging mode, but doing exercises such as reflecting on what matters the most will begin to, I think, have that self-actualization that brings these things to the surface. And it comes down, as Nate said, to like, why are these things meaningful? Like, how did this impact you? What did you learn from it? And show me that. And it's really, really important to always remember that even though the personal statement is very personal and very like free flowing, it comes down to why medicine. So those are like the guiding points when you're looking at these immensely proud, accomplished, or fulfilled moments. You have to start mapping on to see which ones fit that prompt the best.
All right. So focusing on personal growth, look for experiences that have helped you grow as a person. We just mentioned it, both of us. This could include challenges you've overcome, achievements you're proud of, or lessons you've learned. Consider how these experiences have shaped your character and prepared you for a medical career. Again, all those stories at the end of the day, you can ask yourself, how did I grow through this? How did this change me? How did it prepare me to be a better future doctor?
Yeah. And this, again, comes back to a couple of our slides. Even though you are kind of telling this overarching story, the adcoms who are looking at this very quickly oftentimes need to be able to dissect it and take out those relevant skills and qualities that would make you a good candidate for medical school. So you have to make it interesting enough, but also easy enough for them to see that. That's a hard balance to strike. But after practice with this, and for example, working with your peers or advisors like us, you would be able to get a better sense of what that looks like. And you really want to, again, demonstrate, show, not tell. Everyone can tell stories, experiences. If you can show how you implemented what you learned, that is touching on the previous slide of personal growth. as well as your ability to be self-aware and the fact that you are growing at that time. And having that positive trajectory is really important, that these aren't just stagnant skills and qualities that you've already had for 10 years. These are ones that you are constantly developing and improving, knowing that you're going into medicine. So.
Yeah, before we move on real quick, Austin just touched on something that I feel like I get asked so often. People are like, no, you can move to the next slide. That's okay, thank you. But people always ask, they're like, how do I structure my personal statement? 90% of personal statements chronologically. There is a 10% that shouldn't be chronological, but you will know if you're in that 10% because you'll see it and you'll read it and you'll realize how to like piece it out and move it around. But almost everyone else falls into the chronological boot camp to just like start me off at the beginning. And it's so much easier to read through because, like Austin said earlier, we are reading through these things very, very quickly. Like I wish we had more time to spend on them, but there's a lot of applicants and usually admissions committee members are just volunteering their time. And we're trying to balance all of our other responsibilities and obligations at the same time. So we read them thoroughly and we'd like to get a really good idea of who you are as an applicant. But when it flows and it makes it easier for our brain to understand, especially if we've been in the hospital or in the classroom that day, it's much kinder on our brains. Cool. So consider diversity of experiences. Yeah, we mentioned this. Candidates who bring diverse experiences and perspectives to the table, think about how your backgrounds, interests, and experiences can contribute to the diversity of the incoming class. This can include experiences from your personal life, academic pursuits, extracurricular activities, or work experiences. Coming down to this, there are two main takeaways. One is really thinking about how you contribute to the diversity of the school and the body and how you are going to be a strength to your university as a medical student. And the second one is we like to hear your unique stories, perspectives, and experiences, things that make you stand out and differentiate you against all the other pre-medical applicants that we are also evaluating.
Yeah, I think this idea of being genuine and authentic is one that hopefully comes more or less naturally to people who are going into medicine, but sometimes it takes some soul searching to figure out what that actually means to you. Usually medicine attracts authentic people, the ones who want to help the world and help people while still, supporting their own families and such. But this comes down to, what speaks to you the most. I was not going to pretend to be a scientist because I'm just not good at research. That's why we have people like Nate here with his MD PhD route. And because of that, I was able to feel more comfortable with my route through medical school, being genuine to that, starting with the personal statement. I literally started my personal statement with, I don't know, like the quotation. That's what one of the doctors told me. And that was so impactful to me that, doctors can represent different things to different people. Just like the previous slide of how medical schools build diverse cohorts because they want everyone to grow and learn from one another. You want to create a diverse group of physicians so that you can serve the most diverse population out there. And this is where it does not come, again, to checking ticks on a certain list that you have to be in your personal statement or in your experiences or primary application or secondaries. It's about making your own mold and showing that to show that AdComs how you fit your own mold. It's really important. I think it's kind of easy to figure out who's pretending to be something because they think that would look better and who's actually owning and being empowered by what they did, what they like, what they're the most passionate about. And I think the added bonus with that is it makes it easier to write. So hopefully this part would be that key that allows you to free your mind so that you can write most genuinely about stuff like this.
All right. So showing continuity and growth as you reflect on your experiences and character traits, look for themes or patterns that demonstrate continuity and growth over time. we really like this. We like to see this idea of like who you develop as a whole and the things that you're like passionate about and interested in. And this comes down to picking activities. I think also stories from activities that you've had longitudinal experiences in or connect to the overall theme of your application or progression in your story through medicine, things that connect together. And show how your experiences have built upon each other and shaped your journey to becoming a doctor. This can help create a cohesive narrative highlighting your medical school readiness. I should just finish reading the slides before I start editorializing.
Okay, that was super insightful. Thank you both. Let's touch on strategies to ensure your narrative is cohesive.
So again, this comes down to what Nate said. You have very little time and space to make this happen. So it matters all the much more that every word, every sentence, every transition is cohesive here. So you cannot fit everything that you did in your 4 years of college, gap years, whatever they may be, into a personal statement. You have to identify these core ideas you want to convey and know that in your primary application, you can use the activities and experiences section to convey other core ideas that complement what your personal statement is. But the personal statement should really be the bedrock of who you are as a future physician. And this comes down to, like Nate mentioned, those people, those ones who are like really passionate about serving underserved communities, or those who are like in the lab developing novel solutions to really challenging problems. It's really important to focus on that without trying to cover too much ground. It's, recommendations differ in this, but if you're trying to go beyond like 3 main ideas, you're going to get kind of dilute in your personal statement, and you, again, are spreading yourself too thin. Whereas like you really need to make this cohesive. Even those 2-3 ideas shouldn't be that separate from one another. They should be kind of interrelated in that respect.
Okay, so for your personal statement, start by introducing yourself and your interest in medicine, what inspired you to pursue this path, and delve into the middle part of your story by sharing key experiences like volunteering at a hospital or conducting research. Wrap up your story by explaining why you're excited about becoming a doctor and how you plan to make a difference in the field. Just a couple of notes on this one. So don't explicitly introduce yourself. We don't need a "hi, my name is." It's not a letter format style. And I think you can actually sometimes rather effectively start with a cold open. A lot of people start with cold opens. Austin just gave you an example of one. He started with a quotation, "I don't know." And you go, what? What do you mean you don't know? Where am I? What are we reading? And it captures the reader's interest. It's a hook. It's like we're coming back to elementary school. How do you get the reader interested in your story? Cold openings can be effective. Sometimes they're appropriate. Sometimes they're not appropriate. It really depends on the context of the story. But you can also give this overview of just like, I do really like this idea of like starting to set the scene overall for your story and starting and getting into narrative right away. You don't have a lot of space, so you're going to want to use that space to jump into the narrative and tell your story. Each other paragraph in there should be based in either, if it's one story, sometimes people just have like one big story that's really core to their personality and it just flows throughout. Sometimes it's a collection of smaller stories. In each smaller story, you're coming back to that main theme. You already introduced us to your main theme at the introduction. You gave us a little taste. You're coming back to it each time. And then finally in that conclusion statement, it's really explicit. It's really bold. You're like, oh, you've been like breadcrumbing us all along. Here it is at the end. Here's the big main thesis takeaway that's like, oh yes, here we understand exactly how this thematically all connects, and all these experiences will make you a really good doctor and make a difference in medicine.
Okay, amazing. Thanks so much, guys. We've reached the end of our webinar, and now we'll open it up to our Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box below, and our panelists will go ahead and answer them. But while we're waiting for questions to come in, I have a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to writing your personal statement, from starting the brainstorming to creating your brand, to actually writing it and editing it and making it perfect, how long should you be spending on that? And when should you start?
Great question. I'm sure we might have slightly different answers. One, it depends on how much you have going on simultaneously at that time. If you are working a job and you're also, for some reason, also studying for the MCAT, or you're working 3 jobs, you've got classes, you need to be starting way earlier. If you're like, okay, I maybe have a 30, 40 hour a week job and nothing else going on, I'm in a gap year, I'm just taking a few classes, it's senior year, I've got a lot of spare time, I would say I like to tell everyone to start around February, March. That usually gives you a substantial amount of time to get started on the personal statement. I think overall personal statements in general take about 8 to 12 weeks to when I am working with a client. And that is not an easy 8 to 12 weeks. It sometimes requires like 6 or 7, sometimes even more drafts to really get there in the end. But it can take a substantial amount of time to work through it. So I like to say 2 to 3 months, I think, is a good amount of time if you're really light on time, and you can start that around February, March. If you're really busy, I would consider starting even earlier than that, started in December or January, before the May you are planning on clicking that submit button.
Yeah, I think not only does it map onto like what you're doing, but it's almost like your cerebral type in this way too. Are you a proactive person or a procrastinator? And I find myself very much in the former camp, like to where if I don't get it done, it gives me anxiety. It's a weird, I'm still working on it sort of thing. But if you're someone who really works well with deadlines, you may find yourself starting that a little bit later. But I would definitely adhere to Nate's advice. Like, this takes much longer than you would expect, like 5,300 characters to take, because there are multiple iterations of this. I personally went through at least 8, if not 10 drafts with my pre-med advisor back in the day. And obviously you're going to have different amounts of edits every time. It's not like you're starting from square one, but know that you need to give your brain enough time to cohesively make that, such that by the end, you're like, this is pretty good. Like, this is what I want, rather than rushing it. And then your brain isn't even focusing on the ideas. It's just trying to get it done. I would say that universally, the most important thing is submitting your application on time in the setting of rolling admissions. And this can be one of those elements that if you don't treat it appropriately and start early, it will stall you in that respect and get you off on the wrong foot.
That is absolutely true. Make sure you get those applications on time. I was the one who Austin was talking about, who's like maybe a bit of a procrastinator. And I think now I've learned in hindsight, it's like AMCAS is opening next week, y'all. You think it's 2 days, but those 2 days can be the difference between like 10, 15, 30,000, 50,000 more applications coming into AMCAS that they've got to process. So it's just 48 hours to you, but you're going to the back of that line. So it's really important to get things in on time. Don't let those things hold you back. And don't rush them.
Amazing. Great advice. I think that's all the questions that we have for today. So just to wrap it up, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It was a really awesome, insightful conversation. And thank you so much for our panelists for sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. I know I learned a lot. Just want to flag again that this webinar will be sent out to all attendees. If you want to go back and review, it'll be sent out tomorrow. Just want to wish everybody a great night, and thank you for joining, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, y'all.